Charlotte Reyes adjusted the strap on her worn canvas bag and tightened the grip on her boarding pass. Gate 5A, Asheville Regional to Salt Lake City. 1 layover, 5 hours of air, 2 nights of panels, then back to work. She'd told her co-workers this trip was for continuing education. Truth was, it was a favor. The National Palliative Care Conference needed a last-minute replacement speaker, and her old mentor had reached out. Lottie said yes because it felt easier than explaining why she didn't want to. Or maybe she was just tired of saying no to life. Pre-boarding rows 20 through 30. The speaker crackled overhead. She moved toward the line. To everyone watching, she was just another nurse on another flight. Sensible shoes, navy scrubs under a soft cardigan, hair pulled back in a clip. Middle-aged, invisible. A woman who'd seen too many endings and knew how to speak gently through them. But not long ago, Lottie Reyes lived in a different world. One where she didn't speak gently, she gave commands. Where her name was printed on a flight roster, not a hospital badge. Where adrenaline came from altitude, not patient charts. She'd flown faster than sound, soared above deserts and oceans, touched the edge of danger, and loved it. Then she walked away. "Miss?" a voice interrupted. A young flight attendant smiled apologetically. "Are you in Group B?" Lottie blinked. "Yeah, sorry." She stepped forward, scanned her pass, and headed down the jet bridge. The moment she stepped onto the aircraft, she felt it. The hush, the faint hum beneath her feet, the mechanical breath of something alive. Her heart reacted before her head could reason with it. She hadn't flown in years. Not like this. Not where she wasn't in charge. She slid into seat 23A by the window and exhaled slowly. Her fingers ran along the armrest. Automatic, tactile, like checking for control panels that weren't there. A woman lowered herself into the aisle seat next to her. Late 60s, silver bob, glasses with a rhinestone chain. She gave Lottie a cheerful nod. "I'm Maggie," she said, offering a hand. "First time to Utah." "Lottie, not the first, but it's been a while." Maggie grinned. "You look like you know what you're doing." Lottie forced a smile. "Looks can be deceiving." The boarding process droned on. Overhead compartments clicked open and shut. A teenager 2 rows back argued quietly with someone over the phone. Babies fussed. Engines started to murmur beneath the cabin floor. Captain's voice over the intercom. Calm, rehearsed. "Good morning, folks. This is your captain, Ryan Dalton. We'll be cruising at 35,000 feet today, with smooth skies all the way to Denver. Expect a short delay at the gate while we finish fueling. Thanks for flying with us." Lottie recognized the tone. The practiced calm of a man used to being listened to. She closed her eyes and leaned back as the engines revved. The nose pulled forward. The plane rolled into place. Then, the climb. As the landscape fell away below them, the city turned into forest, forest into mountains. The blue ridges stretched like waves under morning light. Lottie's breath caught for a moment, not out of fear, but memory. The first time she soloed a jet, her hands trembled for 10 whole minutes after takeoff. Not from nerves, but from joy. Raw, undiluted joy. That was 15 years ago. She hadn't flown anything with wings since... "I don't mean to be nosy," Maggie said, "but are you okay? You're gripping the seat like it's about to take off without you." Lottie let go, a small laugh escaping. Old habits. "You used to fly?" The question hung there. Lottie hesitated, then answered. "A long time ago. Navy pilot. I left." "Why?" "That's the part I haven't figured out how to explain yet." Maggie nodded slowly. Sometimes life calls us somewhere new. Or we get tired of answering old calls. Lottie looked out the window. Yeah, maybe. The plane leveled out. Coffee carts rolled down the aisle. Someone, a few rows up, asked for ginger ale. The white noise of conversation returned, filling the cabin with an odd calm. Lottie pulled a small notebook from her bag. It was battered, the leather cover worn thin at the edges. She opened it and ran her fingers over the pages. Charts, formulas, scribbled notes from flight school. She'd never shown anyone this notebook. Couldn't throw it away either. She turned to a blank page. Altitude, fuel ratio, descent rates. Why was she doing this? Her hand stopped mid-equation. She shut the notebook and slid it back into her bag. She was a hospice nurse now. Not a pilot, not a commander, just Lottie Reyes from Asheville, who helped people die a little easier. But something didn't feel finished. Not yet. A sharp bump rattled the cabin. The seatbelt sign lit up. Just a little turbulence, Captain Dalton's voice came on. Nothing to worry about. Lottie's fingers instinctively moved to her seatbelt. She clicked it tight, glanced up. The overhead bins held. Passengers shifted, murmured. Another jolt, sharper. The flight attendants moved more quickly now. One passed by, checking rows. Lottie caught her by the elbow gently. "Something wrong?" she asked. "Just some weather," the attendant said, a little too quickly. Lottie nodded, but her gut said otherwise. The plane lurched again. A baby wailed. A drink spilled. Maggie reached for the seat in front of her. Lottie steadied her with one hand. She felt the pitch change. Too sharp. Too soon. The overhead lights flickered, just for a second. Then the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered unexpected turbulence. Please remain in your seats with seat belts fastened." Lottie glanced at the ceiling. One oxygen mask had popped open early and hung like a warning bell. She didn't say anything, but inside, something was shifting. An old switch flipping back on. The kind you don't forget how to use. The kind that never stops waiting to be used again. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The seatbelt sign flickered off, but no one moved, not right away. Lottie sat still, her gaze fixed on the oxygen mask still dangling above row 24. The rest of the cabin had settled back into uneasy chatter, but her hands stayed folded tightly in her lap. The air felt heavier now. Not dangerous, not yet, but uncertain, like the kind of silence before a storm decides whether to break. Maggie leaned in with a concerned glance. "Is that normal? That much rocking?" Lottie offered a calm smile, though her eyes betrayed the calculation behind it. "Planes are built to handle worse. We're still level. The crew isn't panicking." "That's a good sign." Maggie looked relieved, but Lottie felt no such comfort. Her ears picked up a subtle drop in pitch from the engine's hum, just a few decibels, but enough to register. She tried to shake it off. Behind her, a voice rose over the murmurs, smooth, confident, a little too loud to be casual. "You fly often?" Lottie turned. A man in business class, row 22D. Tan blazer, button-down shirt open at the collar. Early 50s, silver at the temples, the kind of hands that looked comfortable with both paper and power. "Enough to hate the peanuts," she said. He grinned. "That bad, huh?" "Depends on how much you like cardboard and regret." He laughed, genuinely, and extended a hand across the aisle. "Ethan Warner, marketing consultant." Heading to Salt Lake for a conference I've already half forgotten. Lottie Reyes, she replied, taking his hand briefly. Hospice nurse. Same conference. Different panel. Ethan tilted his head. That's a big shift, from caring for the dying to flying solo in rough skies. Her breath caught for a second. He didn't know what he'd touched, but the words struck something raw. I don't do the flying part anymore, she said quietly. He nodded, sensing the edge in her tone but not backing off. Used to? A long time ago. Their eyes met. He didn't press further, and she appreciated that more than he knew. But something in his gaze lingered, a recognition of something unspoken. Not pity, not curiosity, just presence. You seem steady, he said. Calm. Most people flinch at turbulence. You looked like you were calculating it. Lottie shrugged. Hard to turn off what you once relied on to stay alive. Maggie, still seated next to her, leaned over. That's exactly what I told her. She doesn't flinch. It's impressive. Lottie chuckled softly. I'm sure I flinch at other things. Like bad hotel coffee and conference icebreakers. Ethan laughed again, but this time it was softer, warmer. Fair. Still, if this plane ever gets in real trouble, I'd sit near you. The words hung between them a beat too long. Lottie shifted slightly in her seat, not uncomfortable, just aware. She wasn't used to being noticed anymore. Not like that. Not in the way that made her heart quietly check its own rhythm. She looked away first, back out the window. Cloud cover now. Thick white rolls stretching endlessly, like cotton wrapped around a secret. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. Folks, we're heading into a patch of mild turbulence. Nothing to be concerned about, but please fasten your seatbelts. Crew, take your stations. Maggie buckled without a word. Lottie did the same, but her fingers moved slower this time. She didn't like the phrasing. Patch was vague. Mild was subjective. And something about the hesitation in the captain's tone unsettled her more than the announcement itself. Ethan leaned over from his seat again, eyebrows raised. Still feeling calm? I'm feeling watchful, Lottie replied. Is that the pilot in you talking? It's the woman who hates surprises at 30,000 feet. He nodded, then lowered his voice. So, what makes someone give up flying? She paused. Her eyes stayed on the seat in front of her. The world narrowed into the small space between questions asked and truths avoided. Sometimes, she said softly, you're told you're too much of one thing and not enough of another. And sometimes, you believe it. Ethan said nothing, but his posture changed. His smile dropped, replaced by something still and attentive. That's hard to hear. Harder to live, Lottie replied. They didn't speak for a moment, not because there was nothing to say, but because the air between them didn't need words right then. Another bump. The lights flickered again, briefly, but enough to draw nervous whispers. A flight attendant passed by, her steps slightly unsteady. Lottie looked up, locking eyes with her for a second. The woman gave a quick nod, assurance or plea, it wasn't clear, and kept moving. Then a sound, not loud, not obvious, but Lottie heard it. A subtle pitch drop in the left engine's rhythm, almost like a singer losing key. She turned toward the window instinctively, watching the wing. No visible issue. But the vibration through the floor had changed. She knew that feeling. A shift in airflow, maybe, or stress in the structure. She reached down for her notebook, opened it, scribbled, fuel-to-weight ratio, glide distance at 28,000 feet, emergency descent angle. Her fingers moved on their own. Lottie? Maggie's voice was quiet. Lottie looked up. Is everything okay? Her throat tightened. I don't know yet. Ethan leaned in again. Should I be concerned? Lottie didn't answer right away. Then, finally, not yet, but stay alert. The words weren't meant to scare. They were meant to prepare. A soft command, buried in gentleness. The cabin dimmed as clouds thickened outside the windows. The light turned silvery blue, ethereal. The kind of light that usually meant sleep or movies or warm blankets. But for Lottie, it meant recalculating everything. She stared at the panel above her seat, checked for subtle shifts, lights, tones, rhythms. She knew them by heart. Maggie whispered, "You're different than you look." Lottie didn't smile this time. "I used to be someone else," she said quietly. Ethan's voice drifted from the aisle. "Maybe you still are." Lottie swallowed hard. "Maybe I still am." Then, almost as if in answer, the plane jolted, harder this time. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Lottie looked toward the cockpit door, still closed, still too quiet. The jolt hadn't passed. It lingered, like a held breath just beneath the surface of the plane. The lights overhead dimmed again, briefly, as if the aircraft were blinking, unsure of its own heartbeat. Lottie's eyes narrowed. Not turbulence. Turbulence rolls and shivers. This was a stutter, mechanical. She'd felt something like it once in a Navy T-45 over the Gulf. And that time, the co-pilot had blacked out from oxygen loss. "Folks," the captain's voice came on, slightly slower now. "We've hit a pocket of unstable air. We're adjusting altitude to smooth things out. Please remain seated with belts fastened." But he wasn't calm this time. There was a hesitation, just 1 second too long, between words. Maggie turned to Lottie. "That didn't sound routine." Lottie didn't lie. "It's not." Ethan leaned further across the aisle. "Do you think something's wrong?" "I think something's not right," she said carefully. The intercom crackled again, then nothing. A brief buzz, as if someone in the cockpit had tried to speak but hadn't made it through. Lottie instinctively opened her notebook again and jotted down the time. She looked around the cabin. The flight attendants were quiet now, gathered near the galley, whispering. One of them, Sophie, according to her name tag, glanced toward Lottie, as if aware that someone was watching. Their eyes locked. Sophie blinked and quickly looked away. Lottie's stomach dropped. Maggie whispered, "What are you writing?" Lottie didn't answer. She didn't have a name for what she was doing yet. Not a checklist, not a plan. But it was happening. She could feel it. The shift. The part of her that had been buried under years of patient charts and quiet hospital rooms, the woman she thought she'd let die, was waking up. The hum beneath the floor shifted again. More than a vibration this time. A rhythm. Unstable. She looked at the seat-back screen. Flight altitude, 31,400 feet. They were descending, faster than they should be. She turned back to Ethan. "You said you travel often?" He nodded, uneasy. "Couple times a month." "Do you ever feel altitude shifts like this, mid-flight?" His brow furrowed. "No." "Should I be worried?" Lottie met his eyes. "Not yet. But don't fall asleep." A laugh tried to form in his throat, but didn't make it all the way. Wasn't planning on it. Another jolt. This one came with a metallic groan from the underside of the plane. Several passengers gasped. A toddler started crying. The oxygen mask in row 24 dropped completely now, No turbulence. No pressure surge. It just fell. A warning. Lottie leaned towards Sophie as she passed again. Something's wrong with cabin pressure. I can feel it. Sophie hesitated. Her lips parted, but her training held her back. Then, in a whisper, "They haven't said." "But the co-pilot." "She didn't come back from her last check. Captain hasn't let anyone in." Lottie's chest tightened. "He's alone?" Sophie nodded once. "And he looks pale." That was enough. Lottie stood. "Ma'am, I need you seated," Sophie said quickly, hands out in front of her. "I'm not trying to cause a problem," Lottie said, voice low. "But I used to fly. Navy pilot. If your captain's flying solo through an equipment failure and losing altitude, he needs someone in that cockpit who can help." Sophie froze. For half a second, she searched Lottie's eyes for doubt. Found none. Then a flicker of fear passed over her. I'll check." Lottie sat down, pulse steady but quick. Her hands pressed into her thighs. Ethan's voice dropped. "You're serious?" She nodded. "I didn't know you weren't supposed to." "And now?" Lottie turned to him. "Now, I don't have a choice." He exhaled, slow. "What are the odds you end up on this plane, on this day?" She didn't smile. "What are the odds a nurse brings a flight notebook she hasn't touched in 7 years? His eyes widened. "You knew?" "No, but something told me to pack it." They stared at each other. Two people who had just stepped into a story that wasn't supposed to be theirs. Then Maggie reached across and took Lottie's hand. "You're going to help, aren't you?" Lottie nodded, not trusting her voice. The cabin was quieter now. Passengers sensed it, the wrongness in the air, the stillness of the crew, the descending path that no one acknowledged. Sophie returned, face pale. She crouched beside Lottie's seat. He said, "The co-pilot lost consciousness about 10 minutes ago. Cabin pressure dropped suddenly. Autopilot's offline. He's trying to compensate, but the left engine's giving inconsistent output. He didn't want to panic the cabin." Lottie stood without another word. Sophie didn't stop her this time. "Seat 1A, Sophie whispered. "The cockpit's just beyond." As Lottie walked down the aisle, people turned to look. Not in alarm, not in fear, but because something about her had changed. The cardigan, the tired nurse's eyes, they were still there. But beneath them, something had emerged. A steadiness, a certainty, the kind of presence that fills a room without speaking. She passed Ethan. He touched her hand as she walked by. Just briefly. "Come back," he said softly. She didn't answer. But she didn't pull away either. The cockpit door waited ahead, and behind it, the moment she thought she'd never face again. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought matter to me either way. The door to the cockpit loomed in front of her, narrow, plain, and humming faintly under pressure. Lottie stopped for half a beat, just long enough to feel the weight of every choice that had led her to this threshold. She took a slow breath and knocked once. The door cracked open barely. A lined face appeared, eyes bloodshot, skin slick with sweat. "Captain Dalton." "You're the nurse?" he asked, voice strained. Lottie nodded. "Charlotte Reyes, former Navy pilot, CFI certified. Sophie said you needed help." Dalton's eyes held hers a second longer than expected, as if searching for something more than credentials. Then he stepped aside. "Get in," The moment she stepped through the door, the air changed. Literally. The scent of metal, sweat, and recycled oxygen hit her all at once. The temperature was warmer here, as if the tension had raised the cockpit's thermostat by 10 degrees. Lottie scanned the controls instinctively. Warning lights blinked in tight clusters, none screaming, but none silent either. The altimeter spun slower than it should. The left engine readout flickered, unreliable, and in the right seat, co-pilot Nina Chu was slumped sideways, breathing shallow but steady, her oxygen mask barely clinging to her mouth. "Pressure shift got her about 15 minutes ago," Dalton said, his voice brittle. "I couldn't break protocol, and I couldn't leave the controls." "You've done well to hold it this long," Lottie said gently. He didn't respond. She slipped into the co-pilot's seat. Her fingers automatically sought the yoke, the switches. Her body remembered everything. Muscle memory. That strange miracle of the mind. "How much of the system's out?" she asked, her eyes scanning the flickering data screens. "Autopilot's non-responsive. Hydraulics are giving inconsistent readings. Comm systems patchy. We're only getting partials from ATC. Left engine surging. I think we've got a coolant issue." Lottie didn't flinch. "How long to Denver?" 45 minutes. But if the left engine drops completely, we won't make it." She nodded. "We'll need to find a closer option," she said. Dalton's grip on the controls didn't waver, but his voice cracked slightly. "You sure you're ready to do this?" "I wouldn't have stepped in if I wasn't." He exhaled, as if he'd been holding that breath the entire flight. "All right, Reyes," he said, a dry edge to his tone. "Let's fly." She smiled, faint but real. "Let's." Outside the cockpit window, clouds thickened like bruises across the sky. The light inside shifted again, gold fading into gray. Below them, the land stretched wide and featureless, rural Nebraska, dotted with specks of highway and irrigation circles. Lottie reached for the backup tablet. "We need an emergency airstrip within 120 nautical miles." Dalton pointed toward the jump seat behind them. "Already checked main logs. Closest viable one is Ogallala." "Ogallala," she repeated. "Old military training field. Still shows up on some FAA legacy maps. Bare bones. No tower. No comms." She tapped through old PDF scans and found it. No lighting. Cracked concrete. Short length. Exactly. Lottie didn't blink. "Then we'll land there." Dalton turned his head slightly. "You sure?" She looked at him steady. "Do we have a better option?" He didn't answer. A beat passed between them, unspoken respect, shared weight. Then, behind them, the cockpit door cracked open again. Sophie peeked through, whispering, "Are you okay? Passengers are asking questions." Lottie turned slightly in her seat. "Tell them we've got experienced support in the cockpit. Nothing more." Sophie nodded. "Understood." As the door shut again, Dalton muttered, "You've done this before. Enough times to know what fear sounds like, and how to steer around it." He adjusted the trim slightly. "Where'd you serve?" "Naval Flight School, then Logistics Transport Division. Flew out of Coronado." Dalton let out a low whistle. "That's no small pond." "No," she said quietly. "It wasn't." He paused. "Why'd you leave?" Lottie's jaw tightened. The question felt more like a ripple than a blow. "I was told I wasn't a crisis pilot, that I didn't have the nerves for real pressure." He didn't laugh, didn't scoff, just said, "They were wrong." A silence fell over the cockpit again, but this time it felt like alignment, not absence. Lottie reached for manual gear deployment toggles. We'll need to drop early. No time for mid-descent malfunctions. Flaps? Best guess. We'll assume partial failure. Prepare for manual glide assist. Dalton nodded, already working in sync with her. Outside, the clouds broke briefly, revealing farmland below. A ribbon of highway curved lazily between patches of cornfield and prairie. We're going to be low and fast, Lottie said. There's no room for elegance on this one. Dalton smiled grimly. I wasn't planning a ballet. She glanced at the analog altimeter. We descend another 2,000 in the next 5 minutes, then manual flare. Got it. They worked like they'd flown together for years. Not one missed beat. Lottie reached for the headset, then paused. Captain, she said, voice quieter. If we don't land clean, and this goes sideways, tell them I took the controls, not you. Dalton stared at her. Why? Because you held this bird together until someone could step in. That matters. He shook his head. You're not going to crash. I know, but still. A long moment passed. Then, soft but certain, he said, if this ends well, they'll know who saved them. Lottie looked forward again. One final scan of gauges, altitude, speed, fuel flow, horizon. Everything now depended on instinct. Outside, the airstrip was still invisible, but Lottie felt it coming. She always knew when the ground was near, and this time, she wasn't afraid to meet it. The runway came into view like a secret finally revealing itself. Cracked pavement, no lights, no lines, just a thin strip of concrete fading into prairie grass. And yet to Lottie, it looked like hope, ragged, unlikely, and exactly what they needed. We've got eyes, she said, voice even through the headset. Final descent in 3. Captain Dalton adjusted the trim. Stabilizers are stiff. Then we muscle it, she replied. Trim for a shallow approach. We glide her in. The cockpit was a blur of shifting numbers and flickering alerts, but neither of them flinched. They'd become a 2-person lifeline, locked into a rhythm forged by instinct and necessity. In the cabin, passengers felt the change. The pitch of the plane, the drop in altitude, the silence of the intercom. Maggie clutched the armrest, her knuckles pale. Ethan leaned across the aisle. She's up there, isn't she? Maggie nodded slowly. She's flying this thing. He exhaled and looked down at the floor, then back out the window. How is that even possible? Because she never stopped being a pilot, Maggie whispered. Even if the world forgot. Back in the cockpit, Dalton was sweating through his shirt. Reyes, you sure about the gear? No, she said, but we need it down. Manual release on my mark. She toggled the lever. A loud clunk reverberated underfoot, then another, but no confirmation light. We've got partial lock, Dalton muttered. Visual? Dalton tapped the backup camera monitor. The footage was grainy, shaky. One wheel confirmed. The others, a blur. It's enough, Lottie said. We land clean, we stay level. They'll hold. The strip was 60 seconds away now. No time to overthink. Just act. Lottie took a breath, then another. This isn't flight school, she muttered. This is life, and I'm not quitting this time. Dalton looked at her, surprised. You quit flight school? I didn't quit flying, she corrected. I just let someone talk me out of it. He opened his mouth to respond, but the wind screamed against the cockpit glass. Coming in fast, he said. No flaps. We'll flare manually. I'll take final approach. You're flying her in? Lottie gripped the yoke. You're tired, and you got us this far. I've got it from here. Dalton's hand hovered over the controls, and then slowly pulled back. The weight of the aircraft was now hers alone. The descent steepened. Lottie counted with every fiber of memory she had. The nose tilted. The wheels skimmed the tips of wild grass. Then, contact. A loud slam. Not a bounce, but not a clean roll either. The tires howled. Sparks flew beneath the wings. The cabin jolted. Passengers thrown forward against belts, heads snapping toward the windows. Lottie adjusted pitch, tapped the brake toggles gently. The plane fought her. The wind resisted. The right wheel gave a threatening lurch. "Hold," she whispered. "Hold steady." The plane veered slightly left. Lottie corrected. Another scream from the gear, but they were slowing. The tree line loomed at the end of the strip, tall and uncaring. 30 feet, 20, 10. The plane lurched once more, then stopped, dead still. Silence followed, the kind that only exists in the wake of a near impossible thing. In the cabin, a small voice broke through. "Did we crash?" A murmur, then laughter, tears, shouts of disbelief. Maggie pressed her hands to her heart. Ethan closed his eyes, just for a second. Then he looked at Maggie and whispered, "She did it." Inside the cockpit, Dalton slumped back with a heavy breath. That was incredible. Lottie didn't move at first. Her fingers still gripped the yoke, like she was holding on to something she wasn't ready to let go of. "You all right?" Dalton asked, voice gentle now. She blinked. "Yeah. Just remembering what it feels like." What feels like?" "To fly." He nodded. "You never forgot." The radio crackled faintly. Emergency crews outside. Flashlights. Voices. The unmistakable sound of relief approaching. Dalton activated the cabin intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. You may have noticed some improvisation today. I'd like to introduce the reason we're all still here. Mrs. Charlotte Reyes, co-pilot, hero, and as of today, my new favorite person in aviation." Lottie flushed, but didn't turn from the controls. "I didn't do it alone," she murmured. Dalton smiled. "That's what all the real ones say." A few minutes later, the door opened. Sophie peeked in, eyes wide with emotion. "We're safe?" she asked, breathless. Lottie turned, her voice soft. "We're safe." Sophie stepped forward, hugging her tightly. No permission asked, no words needed. Then Maggie appeared, eyes damp. "I knew," she said, clutching Lottie's hand. "From the moment you looked at the sky, I knew." Ethan stood behind her, quiet. But when Lottie met his eyes, something passed between them. An understanding, a pulse of unspoken connection. He walked forward, stopping just at the threshold of the cockpit. "You brought us down," he said. "But I think you brought yourself back up too." Lottie looked at him, this stranger who had seen her not just as a nurse or a woman or a passenger, but as someone who could command the sky. "You said you'd sit near me if things went wrong," she said, a slow smile forming. He returned it. "Next time, I'm buying your ticket." The crew began preparing for evacuation. Emergency slides deployed. Lights flickered back on. The sound of sirens came closer. Lottie stayed in the cockpit a moment longer. She looked at the instruments one last time, not as a passenger, not as a stand-in, but as a pilot. She had taken control, and somewhere deep inside, she wasn't ready to let go. Rain had begun to fall in a thin, steady curtain by the time Lottie stepped onto the tarmac. The sky hung low, as if it hadn't decided yet whether to break into storm or hold its breath. Emergency lights strobed through the mist, washing the cracked concrete in red and blue flashes. Voices echoed, urgent, but no longer panicked. Crews moved with quiet efficiency, helping passengers down from the slides, guiding them toward buses and makeshift shelters set up beyond the runway. Lottie paused at the base of the inflatable slide, unsure if her legs would move. For a moment, she stood there, the cold mist collecting in her hair, her palms still tingling from the yoke. Then she descended slowly, one step, then another, until her feet met the ground. And the first thing she heard was applause. It wasn't thunderous or organized. It was scattered, small claps from passengers who had already touched down, some still wrapped in blankets, others hugging strangers. A woman with a toddler. A teenager with blood on his lip from where he'd bitten it during descent. An elderly man gripping a cane, nodding solemnly. They weren't cheering like a crowd. They were thanking her like survivors. Lottie's throat closed. She shook her head slightly, humbled but unable to absorb it. Her instinct was to disappear, to retreat into the shadow of what had just happened. But before she could, Ethan stepped out from the slide and landed beside her. He didn't speak. He didn't reach for her. He just stood next to her, close enough to share the silence. She finally looked at him. His eyes were wet, whether from rain or something else. She couldn't tell. "You okay?" she asked, her voice hoarse. He nodded. "Better than I expected. Worse than I let on." She almost smiled. He studied her. "They're saying it on the radio already. Passenger lands plane after pilot incapacitated. You're going to be famous." Lottie stared out toward the lights. "I don't want to be famous." Ethan turned toward her. "Then what do you want?" She hesitated. "I want to breathe, and maybe not carry this alone." The words surprised her. Not just because she said them, but because they were true. Ethan's voice dropped, softening with something that wasn't pity, but interest. "Then let someone stand next to you for a bit. You don't have to explain anything. I'll just be here." She exhaled, slow and uneven, and nodded. A paramedic approached, clipboard in hand. "Ms. Reyes?" "Yes." "FAA is requesting a preliminary statement. Medical clearance too, standard protocol. We'll get you checked, then inside where it's warm." "I'm fine," she said reflexively. "You're not required to be superhuman tonight," the medic said gently. "Just present." Lottie blinked at that. Superhuman. She hadn't felt super anything. She'd just done what needed doing. But as she looked across the runway, as blankets were draped over shoulders, as kids were lifted onto stretchers just for precaution, as lives continued, quietly, messily, fully, because of choices she made with trembling hands, she realized she might have saved more than just a flight. She might have saved a part of herself. "Okay," she said. "Let's go inside." Inside the temporary shelter, an old hangar turned crisis response center, people were scattered in groups. Soft cots, coffee in paper cups, volunteers handing out granola bars and towels. Someone had set up a small speaker, playing low instrumental music, barely audible over the buzz of conversation, and the hum of generator-powered lights. Lottie sat on a cot near the corner. A paramedic finished checking her vitals and gave a quiet nod of approval. "You're strong," the woman said. "You're going to feel this later, though." Emotionally. Lottie met her eyes. "Already am." The paramedic squeezed her hand and moved on. Across the hangar, Lottie saw Captain Dalton in a recliner, IV in his arm, his uniform rumpled and damp. He lifted a hand in a small salute. She returned it. "Co-pilot okay?" she asked a volunteer walking by. "She's conscious. Lightheaded. They're running full tests, but early signs look good." Lottie let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Then she felt the weight beside her. Ethan. He didn't sit too close. Just enough. "Want some coffee?" he asked. She shook her head. "Too soon." He nodded. They sat in silence for a long moment. Then he said, "I watched you walk to the cockpit and thought, there's no way this ends well. But the way you moved, I don't know. It felt like I was watching something being put back where it belonged." She turned her face toward him slowly. "That's what it felt like," she said. "Like I had walked out of something too soon. Like I'd given it up before I was ready." He met her gaze. "And now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I didn't land that plane to make a point. I just couldn't watch it fall." "You didn't just keep it from falling. You brought it down alive." Her eyes welled, but she blinked fast. "You keep saying the right thing." He smiled, but his voice turned careful. "That's because I mean it." Then, softer. "Can I say something bold?" Lottie tilted her head. "You already are. I'd like to see you again. Off a plane. Somewhere with dinner. Or real coffee. Or maybe just quiet." She didn't respond right away. The idea felt impossible. And exactly right. Finally, she said, "Let me get through the debriefings. And the shock. And probably a few days of crying." "Fair. But after that..." He waited. She looked him in the eyes. "Yeah. I'd like that." His smile widened just a touch. Not giddy, not triumphant, just genuine. Then someone across the room called her name. It was an FAA official, clipboard in hand, approaching with a camera crew not far behind. Lottie looked down at her hands, then at Ethan. "They want a hero," she murmured. He leaned in just slightly. "Give them a human instead." And with that, she stood, shoulders straight, heart pounding, legs still shaking, but ready to face the world as the woman who hadn't just taken control. She'd remembered who she was. Lottie stood beneath the humming fluorescent lights, staring at the reporter's mic like it might explode in her face. She could still hear the echo of Ethan's voice in her mind. Give them a human instead. The camera crew waited, eyes wide, expectant. A gray-haired FAA representative stood to her left, notes in hand, shifting from foot to foot like he was stalling for her courage to catch up. She didn't need courage. She just needed to tell the truth. "Mrs. Reyes," the reporter prompted, pushing her mic forward. "How did you manage to land a commercial aircraft without being part of the current flight crew?" Lottie blinked slowly, then lifted her eyes to meet the camera. "I didn't land the plane alone." The words came out softer than she expected, but the room still stilled around her. She glanced to her right, where Captain Dalton sat in a wheelchair, bandaged, but watching her like a proud older brother. Nearby, Maggie stood with a blanket over her shoulders, arms crossed like a protective mother hen. Ethan, quiet, observant, gave the smallest nod. Lottie took a breath. There were people who trusted me, people who stayed calm, people who kept others calm. A captain who opened the door. A flight crew that didn't panic. I had help. A lot of it. The reporter leaned in. But you were the one flying the plane. Lottie hesitated, just for a beat. I was a nurse, a passenger. I wasn't supposed to be the one in that cockpit. But sometimes life doesn't wait for titles. Sometimes when everything starts falling apart, someone has to step forward. The FAA rep cleared his throat. Ms. Reyes, Charlotte, was once certified as a Navy pilot. She hadn't flown in years, but her records confirm her training was extensive. That training saved lives today. The room stirred again. Pens scratching, cameras flashing, phones buzzing. But it wasn't just training, Lottie said. It was instinct, memory, and more than anything, it was purpose. She looked straight into the camera now, not as a performer, not as a hero, but as a woman reclaiming something long buried. People think they lose parts of themselves when they change careers, when they leave things behind. But maybe we don't lose those parts. Maybe they just wait for the right moment to come alive again. The room went silent. Someone behind the camera let out a quiet breath. The FAA official stepped forward, clapped a hand gently to her shoulder, then guided her off to the side as the questions began again. But Lottie had said enough. For tonight. She made her way back toward the rear of the hangar, where cots lined the walls like beds in a summer camp infirmary. Her legs ached now, the adrenaline having finally ebbed. Her body remembered the weight she'd carried. And her heart. It was still catching up. Ethan stood as she approached. You were perfect. I wasn't trying to be. That's why it worked. She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Are you okay? He asked. I don't know yet, she admitted. Can I sit with you anyway? She nodded. They sat side by side on the edge of a cot, surrounded by the soft clatter of cups, low murmurs, and the occasional quiet laugh from someone still processing survival. Lottie wrapped her arms around herself, fingers digging lightly into the sleeves of her borrowed jacket. Do you think they'll ever stop asking for interviews? She asked. Eventually, Ethan said. Fame moves on. I hope it moves fast. He looked at her for a long moment, his voice quieter now. Do you want to disappear again? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. I don't know how to be seen without being defined by it, she said finally. I don't want to become a symbol. I just want to live. You already are living, Ethan said. But maybe this time, you don't have to do it on your own. She glanced sideways. You make it sound simple. It's not, he admitted. But I've spent years building brands for people who never knew who they really were. You know exactly who you are. That's rarer than you think. Her voice cracked just a little. Then why did I forget for so long? He reached over slowly, not to touch her, not to fix anything, but to offer his hand. Just that. You didn't forget, he said. You just needed a reason to remember. She looked at his hand, then at her own. Fingers that once held hospital charts, wiped brows, steadied morphine drips. Fingers that had wrapped around a yoke at 32,000 feet, trembling, but unshakable. She laced her hand with his. Warmth bloomed instantly. Not romantic, not yet, but real, comforting. A reminder that strength didn't mean standing alone. A volunteer called her name gently. Ms. Reyes, there's a family who'd like to thank you. The Jamesons. You helped their daughter stay calm mid-flight. Lottie looked at Ethan. Go, he said, smiling. I'll be right here. She walked across the hangar slowly. The Jamesons were waiting with their arms around a 10-year-old girl who beamed when she saw Lottie. You're the one who talked to the pilot, the girl said. I'm the one who listened to the plane, Lottie replied with a wink. The girl giggled, then stepped forward and hugged her, and Lottie let herself receive it. Fully. And as she stood there, wrapped in the arms of a stranger's child, the fog of who she used to be began to lift. She wasn't just the nurse, or the pilot, or the hero. She was all of it, and this time, she was ready to live it out loud. 2 days later, the hotel room was too quiet. Lottie sat at the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap, watching the rain streak down the wide glass window of the Denver Marriott. Downtown buzzed below, people living their lives, unaware that just across the city sat a woman who, for 61 minutes in the air, had held the lives of nearly 200 souls in her hands. She hadn't slept much. She hadn't cried either. Not yet. Something inside her still hadn't caught up. On the small table beside her, a manila envelope lay unopened. FAA report intake. Official language, polite signatures, words like commendable action and probable cause still under review. They wanted to interview her again next week in D.C. She didn't know if she was going to say yes. Her phone buzzed. A message. Ethan, coffee in the lobby, or are you still hiding from the world? She stared at the screen. A few seconds passed. Then she typed, meet me in 10. Don't bring flowers. I'm still suspicious of people who smile before 9 a.m. The reply came instantly. Ethan. Copy that. No flowers. Just a latte and questionable charm. Lottie smiled in spite of herself. 10 minutes later, she stepped into the lobby wearing a simple gray sweater, jeans, and her hair pulled back into a low, no-nonsense ponytail. No makeup, no hero shine, just her. Ethan was already waiting near a corner table, 2 coffees in front of him, his coat still damp from the drizzle outside. You came, he said, standing up reflexively as she approached. I said I would. I know, but part of me thought you'd ghost me for a week. She tilted her head. Didn't think I was the type. No, I thought you were the type to disappear so quietly I'd have to pretend we never met. She looked at him for a moment. That's fair. He handed her a coffee. Oat milk, no sugar. You remembered? I listen when women talk, especially when they land planes. She sipped and let the warmth settle in her chest before she spoke again. Ethan, why are you really here? He looked caught off guard, but only briefly. I told you. I wanted to see you again, not on a plane, not with a disaster between us. She nodded, then took a breath. There's something I should say before this gets anything. He leaned forward. I'm listening. I'm not whole, she said. I'm patched together with a lot of questions and a past I haven't made peace with yet. What happened on that plane? It didn't fix me. It reminded me of who I was. But that doesn't mean I've figured out who I want to be now. Ethan didn't blink. He took that in fully. I wouldn't expect you to have it figured out. She looked away, unsure. Then his voice softened. Can I say something? She nodded. I don't want you to be whole. That sounds terrifying, honestly. What I want is someone real. Someone who knows what it's like to be cracked, but still standing. His words landed gently, like rain on soft soil. Lottie looked up at him, something unspoken blooming between them. He went on, slower now. And selfishly, I'd like to be there while you find out what's next. Not to guide you, just to walk beside you. Her throat tightened. She didn't know how to answer that with words, so she reached across the table and placed her hand on his, just lightly, just enough. A moment passed. Then her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She hesitated, then let it ring out. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Important? Maybe, she said. But not right now. They sat in the quiet hum of the lobby, coffee cups warm, fingers barely touching, and the weight of everything not spoken becoming the most honest thing in the room. After a while, she asked, "Do you think something like that? What happened up there? Changes a person permanently?" Ethan looked out the window, then back at her. "I think it reveals the parts of you that were already waiting." She nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about the passengers," she said. "What they'll take from this, what I'll take from this. I thought it would feel more triumphant, but it just feels tender." "That's not a bad thing," he said. "Tender means alive." They sat in silence again, not uncomfortable this time. Then Ethan leaned back. "You know, this coffee date's got an odd ratio of emotional honesty to caffeine. I think you're ruining me for casual relationships." Lottie laughed, a real warm laugh. It caught her off guard. "Good," she said. "I never liked casual anything." He grinned. "So what's next? For the world's most reluctant aviation icon?" She looked out the window. "I don't know. I think I'm going home first. Back to the coast. Back to my mom's house, maybe. Let myself come down from altitude." He nodded. "And then? And then? Maybe I learn to fly again. Maybe I don't. Maybe I just figure out how to feel again, without needing a disaster to remind me I'm still here." Ethan watched her quietly. "Wherever you go next, can I keep showing up?" She met his eyes. "I think I'd like that." The hum of the city moved on outside. The rain lightened. Morning broke slowly across Denver, and in that hotel lobby, beneath the quiet sounds of travelers and espresso machines, Lottie Reyes, pilot, nurse, survivor, sat across from someone who didn't ask her to be anything but herself. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. 3 weeks later, the ocean air hit Lottie like a memory she hadn't earned yet. The salt, the wind, the thrum of seagulls skimming waves. She stood at the edge of the bluff outside Camillia, California. An unassuming stretch of cliff she used to drive to as a teenager just to breathe. The old wooden bench was still there. Same rusted bolts, same initials carved into the side. She sat slowly, the wood creaking beneath her. In her coat pocket, the folded FAA letter rustled with the wind. They'd cleared her, official commendation, request for a follow-up series of interviews, potential consultancy, training programs, media appearances. She hadn't said yes. She hadn't said no, because she still didn't know what to say. Behind her, the screen door of the little rental cottage groaned open. Ethan stepped out, hands in his pockets, gaze soft as it landed on her. "You come here often?" he asked, voice teasing. "Every time I needed to remember I was still a person." He sat beside her, careful not to crowd. "Nice bench." "It's older than me." "Still holding strong." She gave him a look. "Are you comparing me to a bench?" "I'm saying maybe strength doesn't have to look new to be real." She looked back at the sea. Quiet. It was a different kind of silence now. Not numb, not withdrawn, still, settled. "I keep thinking about that little girl on the plane," Lottie said. "The one with the stuffed flamingo." "Sadie," Ethan nodded. "She sent you a letter, didn't she?" "She did. Crayon handwriting and all. She said I was the bravest lady she ever met, then asked if she could be a nurse and a pilot too." He smiled, watching her carefully. "I haven't answered her yet." "Why not?" Lottie twisted her fingers together. "Because I don't want to lie to her. I'm not brave. I was terrified." Ethan turned toward her, full now. "Lottie, being brave doesn't mean you weren't scared. It means you did it anyway." She closed her eyes, wind pulling strands of hair across her face. "And what if I never fly again? What if that was it? My last moment in the air?" "Then it was the right moment," he said softly. "And maybe the point wasn't flying again. Maybe it was showing the rest of us what it looks like to stop running." Her voice cracked. "I've been running for 10 years. He nodded. "And maybe now, you don't have to." A silence stretched between them. Then she asked, almost whispering, "Why are you still here?" He looked at her like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Because you landed more than a plane, Lottie." She turned her face toward him slowly. "You landed something in me I didn't know was missing." Her breath caught, and for a long, suspended moment, neither of them spoke. Then, quietly, uncertainly, she rested her head on his shoulder. They stayed like that until the wind cooled and the sky began to blush with early sunset. Later, inside the cottage, the kettle whistled on the stove. Lottie stood in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug. The FAA letter sat open on the table now. Ethan leaned against the counter, eyes tracing her face with that familiar blend of respect and curiosity. "They offered me a spot on a civilian aviation advisory board," she said, tapping the paper. "Some sort of pilot wellness committee. Think I'd have to go back to DC once a quarter." "And?" he asked. "I don't know. It sounds important, but I don't know if I'm ready to be Captain Reyes again." Ethan stepped closer. "Maybe you don't have to be anyone but you. And maybe people need that version more." She looked up at him. "Do you?" He didn't blink. "I need the one who lands in truth, not in titles." She breathed slowly, then handed him the mug. He took it without breaking eye contact. "Have you told your mom?" he asked, sipping. Lottie winced. "Not exactly. She knows something happened." She saw a clip of the interview, but I've been avoiding the long version. "Why?" "Because she'll want me to come home. She'll want to say she told me I'd be more than a nurse, and I'm not ready to have that conversation yet." Ethan set the mug down and stepped close again, lowering his voice. "Then don't do it for her. Do it for you." She looked up at him, heart pacing in her throat, and finally she whispered, "Would you come with me?" He didn't even hesitate. "Anywhere." Her shoulders dropped. Something unspooled in her chest, slow and warm. "You don't even know what you're saying yes to." "I'm saying yes to the next page." Lottie blinked hard. Then, softly, "Me too." They stood there in the tiny kitchen, ocean wind slipping through the windows, and for the first time in years, Lottie Reyes allowed herself to imagine a future not built on escape, but on return. Not survival, belonging. And this time, she wouldn't land it alone. The familiar hum of tires on asphalt was the only sound between them as the rental car curved through the redwoods. Lottie gripped the steering wheel loosely, her eyes scanning the road ahead, but her thoughts drifting somewhere deeper. older. Ethan sat beside her, gaze fixed out the passenger window, though every so often she felt him glance her way. They were 2 hours north of Cambria now, winding their way toward Monterey, toward the house she hadn't seen in nearly 6 years. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, careful. "I will be," she answered, but it came out a little too fast. She took a breath and added, "This place, it holds more than I thought it would. Memories and silence, the kind you carry for years without knowing." Ethan didn't press. He just let the quiet fill the space between them like a warm weight. The Reyes home sat on the edge of a cul-de-sac with chipped paint and a rose bush that had overtaken half the front steps. Lottie pulled into the cracked driveway and killed the engine. The porch light flicked on almost immediately. Her mother was already watching. The screen door creaked open, and there she was, Alma Reyes, silver streaks in her dark braid, arms crossed in a stance that mixed concern and fierce love in equal parts. Lottie stepped out of the car slowly, as if the ground might move beneath her. Alma didn't wait. She walked down the porch steps and wrapped her daughter in an embrace so tight it made Lottie forget how to breathe. "You should have called sooner," Alma whispered into her hair. "I know. You were on the news. I know. I prayed every second of that flight, even before I knew you were on it." Lottie pulled back, eyes glistening. "How do you always know?" A mother doesn't forget the weight of her child's heartbeat. Alma turned to Ethan, who stood politely at the side of the car, giving them space. "And this handsome man is—" "Ethan," he said with a small smile, extending his hand. "Friend. Mostly a tag-along for now." Alma shook his hand firmly. "You bring her peace?" "I try," he answered. "Then come in. I made caldo." Inside, the house was exactly as Lottie remembered. Framed photos with curling corners, a worn leather recliner her father once claimed, the faint smell of cinnamon and cedar. At the kitchen table, bowls of steaming broth and soft tortillas waited. They ate quietly at first, Alma watching them both like she could measure healing by the way Lottie held her spoon. "So," Alma said at last, setting down her glass. "Are you going back?" Lottie froze. "To flying?" her mother clarified. "I don't know." Alma nodded. "Then let me ask a better question. Do you want to?" Lottie stared down at her bowl. "For a long time, I thought not flying meant I was broken," she said slowly. "Then, after the flight, I realized I still had it in me. But I also realized I'd been using the cockpit to escape. From grief, from failure, from myself." Alma's gaze didn't waver. "And now? Now I don't want to fly to get away. I want to fly because I know what it means to come back down." Ethan looked at her, something shifting in his eyes. Alma reached across the table and took Lottie's hand. "Then do it. But this time, do it as the woman you are, not the one you left behind." That night, after Alma had gone to bed, Lottie and Ethan sat on the back porch wrapped in an old quilt, the sky dusted with stars. "I think she knew all along," Lottie said, "that I needed to fall apart a little before I could land again." Ethan leaned his head against hers. "And she's proud you found your way." Lottie turned toward him. "And you? What are you thinking?" He hesitated. "That I didn't come here expecting anything. But somehow, sitting on this porch, sharing soup with your mother, watching you breathe like you're not bracing for impact anymore." He paused, searching for the words. "It feels like home." Lottie felt the words settle in her chest, like something sacred. "I never expected someone like you," she whispered. Someone like me? Someone who didn't need me to be perfect. Just honest. Ethan turned his face toward hers. I'm not perfect either, but I'm here, for all of it. Their eyes held, and then, slowly, gently, their lips met. Not dramatic, not movie perfect, just real, quiet. Like two people who understood that love wasn't about fireworks. It was about stillness. When they pulled apart, Lottie whispered, "You're not just a tag-along." "Good," he smiled, "because I already unpacked my heart." They stayed out there until the breeze turned cool, and the silence between them felt like the most beautiful part of the evening. Tomorrow would come with decisions and headlines and letters that still needed answers. But tonight, under a sky that didn't ask anything of them, Lottie let herself believe in beginnings again. And for the first time in a very long while, she wasn't afraid of where the story might go next. The airport tarmac shimmered under the noon sun, heat waves dancing just above the concrete, like ghosts Lottie could almost name. She hadn't stood in this spot in over 6 years. Not since the day she left aviation behind. Her duffel bag heavy with resignation, her heart gutted by guilt she'd never spoken aloud. But now, here she was again, dressed in a crisp flight instructor's uniform, with no epaulets, no rank, just her name embroidered in clean black thread, C. Reyes. Her fingers flexed instinctively as she stepped toward the hangar. It wasn't the Navy. It wasn't commercial. It was civilian training. A flight school run out of a small airfield just outside San Luis Obispo. The kind of place where people didn't chase speed records, they chased second chances. She hadn't even said yes until 2 nights ago. The program director, a woman named Vi, had called her after reading a quiet op-ed Ethan had ghostwritten under her name in the Monterey Herald. "Not all heroes wear uniforms," it read. "Some wear old sweaters and carry the weight of what could have been, waiting for the sky to call them back." It took her days to respond, but she did. She was here now. As she reached the hangar, she spotted Vi near the wing of a Piper Archer, laughing with 2 teenage cadets. Lottie approached quietly. Vi turned, caught her eye, and smiled like she'd been waiting all morning. "You're early." "I didn't sleep much." Vi nodded, her tone light but her gaze sharp. "Good. Sky belongs to those who can't sit still." The cadets glanced over, whispering, "Is that?" "It's her." "Yeah." Lottie forced a half-smile and turned to Vi. "I'm not used to being seen." "You'll get over that." Lottie raised a brow. "Or," Vi added, "you won't, and you'll fly anyway." She handed Lottie a clipboard. "Pre-flight checklist for your first orientation student. Meet me in briefing room 2 when you're ready." Lottie took it, her hands steadier than she expected. "Thanks." As Vi walked off, Lottie moved to the aircraft, her fingers trailing along the cool metal. Her shadow stretched out beneath her, still there, still solid. She closed her eyes and breathed. Behind her, footsteps approached. "You really showed up," Ethan's voice said, gentle and sure. She turned to find him leaning against the open hangar door, coffee in hand, sun glinting off the edge of his sunglasses. His tie was slightly crooked. He'd driven up from LA that morning, no hesitation. "I told you I would. I didn't think you'd wear a uniform. I didn't think I'd say yes." He stepped closer. "You did more than say yes, Lottie. You came back to the sky on your terms." She looked down at the clipboard. "It still scares me." "Good," he said. "Means it matters." She smiled then, brief but real. "Are you staying for the class?" "If you'll let me sit in the back and not breathe too loudly." She tilted her head. "Deal." The classroom was small, sunlit, with rows of mismatched chairs and a whiteboard that looked like it had survived multiple eras of flight theory. Lottie stood at the front, clipboard in hand, 3 students watching her with curiosity and no small amount of awe. One raised a hand. "You're really the one from Flight 982? Lottie glanced at Ethan in the back, then back to the student. "I am. But today, I'm your instructor. So let's talk about what you would have done in my seat." The class leaned in. Lottie didn't teach like other instructors. She didn't talk about checklists first or throw acronyms on the board. She talked about breath, muscle memory. Listening to a plane the way a nurse listens to a patient, close, attentive, quiet. "The air tells you when something's wrong before the lights do," she said. "Trust the silence between the alarms." By the time the session ended, even the skeptical kid in the back was sitting forward, nodding like he'd just found the missing page in a book he didn't know he was reading. Afterward, Vi clapped her on the shoulder. "That was damn near poetic." I wasn't trying to be. That's why it worked. Outside, the sky was beginning to cloud, thin streaks of gray brushing the blue. Lottie and Ethan stood near the edge of the runway, watching a student do taxi drills. "You looked like yourself in there," Ethan said. "I felt like her. And I didn't hate it." He chuckled. "That's high praise." She turned to him, more serious now. "There's something I didn't tell you." He stiffened slightly. "Okay. The FAA, they offered me a position, part-time, pilot mental health advisor. It's all remote, but I'd need to go to DC a few times a year." Ethan blinked. "When did they offer?" 2 weeks ago. I hadn't decided. And now, I want to say yes, but I also want to stay here, teach, be grounded. You can do both." "Can I?" she asked. He stepped closer, voice low. "Lottie, the sky isn't an either-or. You don't have to choose one version of yourself anymore." She swallowed hard. "Then I choose this, the flying, the teaching, and—" Her voice trailed off. Ethan reached for her hand. "And what?" "And you." His breath caught, just for a moment. Then he smiled. "That's the only offer I was waiting for." She laughed, the sound breaking open something that had been sealed for too long. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the edges of her uniform. Lottie looked to the sky, then to the horizon beyond. She was no longer running from it. She was flying toward it. Lottie stood in front of the mirror, one hand pressed lightly to her chest. Her reflection stared back with a kind of stillness she hadn't known in years. She wasn't dressed in a pilot uniform or her nursing scrubs, just a soft chambray shirt and worn jeans. No title, no performance. Just her. The invitation sat on the dresser. National Aviation Safety Conference, Washington, D.C. Keynote. Guest, Charlotte Reyes, RN, CFI, former Navy pilot. It still felt strange, seeing her name printed like that. Like somehow all the fragmented versions of herself had agreed to sit at one table and introduce themselves. Ethan knocked softly at the bedroom door, then peeked in. "You ready?" She turned. "Almost." He walked over and adjusted the small lapel mic she'd been given for the conference. "I know you hate public speaking." She gave a half smile. "I don't hate it. I just hate the moment right before it starts." He leaned in, brushing a kiss over her temple. "Then let's make sure the moment after is worth it." They stepped out of the suite and took the elevator down to the ballroom, where 100 chairs were filled with FAA officials, veteran pilots, instructors, and a few journalists who'd never stopped chasing the miracle nurse pilot headline. But Lottie wasn't here for them. She was here for the ones still too afraid to step back onto a plane. The ones who'd walked away from flying because grief had grounded them. The ones who thought surviving meant hiding. Vi was in the front row, nodding at her like she could read Lottie's pulse from 20 feet away. Alma had flown in the night before. She sat beside Vi, eyes proud, hands folded in her lap, like she was praying and cheering all at once. Lottie stepped onto the stage. The room quieted. Her palms didn't sweat. Her voice didn't shake. She looked out over the crowd and began, "When I was 19, my father told me that real flying isn't about speed. It's about trust. Trust in your training. Trust in your instincts. And sometimes, trust in the silence." She paused, letting the words settle. "When I walked away from flying, I thought I was broken. I let fear write my story. I told myself I had failed the people who needed me most, that I wasn't strong enough to deserve the sky." A hush fell, deeper than before. But then, one day, 36,000 feet in the air, the worst happened, and I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I listened. Lottie let her gaze drift to Ethan in the back, his smile steady. I listened to a plane that was failing. I listened to the silence between systems. I listened to the breath in my chest. And when the cockpit cleared and the alarms stopped screaming, I remembered who I was. She took a breath. Flying didn't save me, but it brought me back to myself. In the pause that followed, she looked toward her mother. Alma gave the smallest nod, eyes shimmering. "I'm not here because I'm fearless," Lottie said. "I'm here because I learned to stop letting fear make decisions for me." She let her hand rest gently on the podium. "There are people in this room who've lost students, who've walked away from flights that didn't go the way they planned. Some of you carry grief like a second headset. I see you. I was you." Another pause. "But I also believe in something more. I believe in what happens after. After the crash. After the silence. After the moment you think you can't return." She took a final breath and stepped back. "Because the truth is, we're all passengers sometimes, until the moment we choose to take control." The room erupted into applause, not the polite kind, the kind that rose up like a wave and wrapped her in something she didn't know she needed. When she stepped down, Vi met her with a tight hug. "You killed it," she whispered. Ethan was waiting just off stage. "That was—" He paused, his voice thick. "That was everything." Lottie exhaled shakily. "I didn't know if I could say it all out loud." "You didn't just say it," he murmured. "You owned it." Later that evening, after the dinner reception, Lottie and Ethan slipped away to the rooftop. The city glowed below, lights blinking like runway markers leading somewhere new. She leaned against the railing, watching the horizon. "Do you think people change?" she asked quietly. Ethan stepped beside her. "I think people return to who they were before life got in the way." She turned to him, tears in her eyes. Not sad, just full. "I'm not running anymore." He smiled and touched her face gently. "Then maybe now's the time to fly." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Above them, the stars blinked quietly in the black sky, patient, steady, waiting, just like the sky, just like her. The hum of the twin-engine Cessna vibrated softly through Lottie's bones as she guided it above the coastline, tracing the Pacific with steady hands. The sky was clear, every mile of horizon gleaming like it had been scrubbed clean just for her. Ethan sat beside her in the co-pilot seat, headset slightly askew, scribbling notes for the magazine feature he was writing. "You always this quiet up here?" he asked, glancing over with a grin. Lottie smiled, eyes still on the instruments. "I used to talk more, back in the Navy. You narrate every move, every thought. But now, I think I just like hearing the silence. It answers things." "Like what?" She paused. "Like whether I belong here." He didn't argue. He didn't try to reassure her. He just nodded, as if the question itself deserved room to breathe. As they leveled off at 4,000 feet, the flight school's airspace behind them, Lottie reached for the radio, confirming position with regional control. Her voice was calm, low, professional. There was something healing about the routine of it. No cameras, no headlines, no praise, just air and rhythm. "I got an email this morning," she said after a moment. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Good or bad?" "Neither. Complicated." She handed him her phone from the side pocket. He read silently, his brow furrowed. From A.J. Pearson. Subject, just one conversation. "Charlotte, I've replayed that flight 100 times. Not for the chaos, but for how you handled it. I owe you a debt. But more than that, I need to clear something up. If you're open to meeting, I'm in San Luis this week. Say the word." "A.J." Ethan looked up slowly. "The A.J.?" She nodded, hands firm on the yoke. "Co-pilot on 982. You haven't spoken to him since the incident?" "Not once. He left the industry after the investigation. I heard he was dealing with PTSD. Guilt." Ethan hesitated. "Are you going to meet him?" Lottie didn't answer right away. "I don't know. Part of me feels like I should. The other part still hears silence when I think of that day." They flew on for several long minutes, the sky their only witness. Then Ethan said, "Sometimes silence is just the space waiting to be filled." Lottie landed the plane with precision, flaring just above the runway, before settling gently, as if the aircraft knew it was returning to trusted hands. The wheels kissed the ground, and the moment held. Back at the flight school hangar, Lottie climbed down and began her post-flight walk-around. Ethan joined her, handing over a bottle of water. "What if this conversation with A.J. opens something up that I can't put back?" she asked suddenly. Ethan leaned against the wing, quiet. Then maybe it was never supposed to stay closed. Later that evening, Lottie sat on the back steps of the house she and Ethan were renting near the hills. The breeze smelled like eucalyptus and faint ocean spray. She stared at the message again. A.J. The last time she'd seen him, he was pale, trembling in the airport briefing room, unable to meet her eyes. He hadn't spoken during the inquiry except to say, "I don't remember the moment I froze." But she did. She remembered it in startling clarity. The warning lights, the dip in altitude, the sudden silence from his side of the cockpit, and then her voice cutting through it, taking control. Not to shame him, just to survive. Now, years later, here he was, asking for something she hadn't expected. Not forgiveness, not even redemption, just a conversation. She clicked, reply. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Blackbird Cafe, corner table, no press, no noise, just the truth. CR." She hit send, before she could overthink it. Inside, Ethan was at the counter, boiling water for tea. He glanced over as she entered. "You're doing it?" he asked. She nodded. He didn't offer advice, just poured hot water over the chamomile bag and passed it to her. "What if he's not the person I remember?" she asked quietly. "Then you'll meet him as the person you've become." She sipped the tea slowly, the warmth grounding her. That night, she lay in bed longer than usual, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above. Ethan shifted beside her, half asleep, one hand resting lightly over hers. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "I'm here," he murmured, without opening his eyes. And somehow, that was enough. The next chapter of her story wasn't about a flight plan or a dramatic save. It was about returning, fully, fearlessly, to the places that still whispered her name. Even if one of those places was a conversation she'd waited years to have. The Blackbird Cafe was quiet at 2 o'clock, exactly as Lottie had hoped. A breeze drifted through the open windows, carrying the scent of espresso and wild mint. She chose the corner table, facing the door, her back to the wall. It was a habit from her Navy days. Some instincts never left. She stirred her tea slowly, fingers wrapped around the warm cup like it might anchor her. Every few seconds, she glanced toward the entrance, half hoping and half dreading she'd been stood up. Then the door opened. Ajay Pearson stepped in, his frame leaner than she remembered, hair grayer at the temples. He hesitated at the threshold, eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. Something flickered across his face. Regret, maybe. Or something heavier. He approached slowly, like he wasn't sure the floor would hold. "Lottie." She nodded. "AJ." He sat across from her, quiet. Neither spoke for a moment. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she finally said. "I almost didn't," he replied. "But then I thought, if I could land a plane again, I could walk into this room." Her eyes softened. "You're flying again?" "Just started. Small charters out of Santa Rosa. Nothing big." She nodded, then looked down at her tea. "So, why now?" He leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped like he was holding something invisible but fragile. "Because I needed to face the moment I failed, and the person who didn't." She looked up, startled. "You didn't fail, AJ. You froze. It happens. You know that." "I froze when I was supposed to act. That's not just a technical mistake, Lottie. That's a break in trust. In the cockpit, in myself. And I've carried it every day since." He met her eyes, and she saw it. Rawness, unsaid grief, the residue of shame. "I read every word of the inquiry report," he continued. "They called you a hero, said your instincts were flawless, but they didn't talk about the part where you had to do my job too, where you sat beside someone who disappeared into silence when you needed him most." Lottie's throat tightened. "You think I haven't replayed that moment?" He blinked. "I've had nights where I wondered if I should have shouted louder, if maybe I could have reached you in time. But here's the truth, AJ. We didn't crash. We survived. And you didn't leave me alone in the cockpit. You stayed, scared, frozen, but still there." She leaned back, breathing through the memory. "The thing that haunts me isn't that you froze. It's that neither of us knew how to talk about it after." Silence stretched between them, weighty but not sharp. He cleared his throat. "After I left flying, I took a job managing a warehouse. Stayed away from anything with an engine. I told myself I didn't deserve the sky. And now?" He shrugged. "Now I think the sky doesn't belong to the fearless. It belongs to the ones who go back anyway. Lottie stared at him, heart slowing. You said you owed me something. I do. She tilted her head. What is it? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded scrap of paper. It was creased and yellowed, like it had been touched 100 times. He handed it to her. She unfolded it. It was a checklist, handwritten. The emergency protocol sequence from Flight 982. I wrote this that night, he said. Every detail I could remember. I keep it with me as a reminder, not of what went wrong, but of what you did right, and what I learned from it. Lottie blinked hard, the words swimming in and out of focus. I'm not asking for forgiveness, AJ added softly. Just understanding. She folded the paper and set it between them. You already have it. He let out a breath, slow and deep, like he'd been holding it for years. They talked for another hour. Not just about the flight, but about their lives since. About teaching. About fear. About what it means to let go of guilt. Not because it disappears, but because it can't define you forever. As the sun dipped lower through the cafe windows, AJ stood. I'll never stop being grateful, he said. But I hope one day I can be worthy of the thanks. Lottie stood too. You already are. You came back. He smiled, shaky but real, and walked out into the late afternoon light. Lottie sat for a moment longer, fingers resting on the folded checklist. Then she reached for her phone. A message blinked on the screen. From Vi. Need you tomorrow for a double class. Cadet with panic issues asked specifically for you. Said you're the only one who gets it. Lottie smiled. She texted back. I'll be there. Outside, the world felt different. Not because it had changed, but because she had. And for the first time, the silence in her chest was not the weight of something broken. It was peace. The morning sun cast a soft golden hue over the runway, dusting the tops of the hangars in a sleepy glow. The sky was wide and waiting. Lottie stood at the edge of the tarmac, her flight jacket tucked under one arm, a light breeze teasing the edges of her hair. She was scheduled to co-teach the final flight simulation of the semester, a test flight with a cadet named Molly, one of the youngest students Vi had ever accepted. Molly had once refused to sit in the pilot's seat. Now, she insisted on it. I want to prove to myself I can, the girl had said a week ago, her voice trembling but steady. That morning, Molly jogged across the tarmac with a clipboard clutched to her chest and a grin that was half nervous, half unstoppable. Checklist complete, she said. Pre-flight secure, fuel double-checked. Lottie smiled, heart blooming with a quiet pride. You're sure you want to take off? Molly nodded. I'm ready. They climbed into the small plane, the familiar scent of leather and sun-warmed metal washing over Lottie like a memory. As Molly ran through the startup sequence, Lottie watched, silent, supportive, present. She didn't need to intervene. Molly took the runway with slow, deliberate power. The wheels lifted gently off the ground, and just like that, they were airborne. At 3,000 feet, Molly exhaled a shaky breath. You ever think you'd end up here? Lottie looked out over the California coastline, the cliffs below, jagged and glinting. Not like this, she said. But I'm glad I did. They flew in a soft loop, then practiced a stall recovery drill. Lottie guided Molly through it calmly, her voice even, her hand light on the controls. By the time they returned, Molly's face was lit up with adrenaline and awe. You did that, Lottie said as they taxied off the runway. Molly unbuckled, heart still pounding. You helped. No, Lottie said softly. You took control. Vi was waiting near the hangar, her arms crossed, but her smile giving her away. She's ready, Lottie said, handing over the clipboard. I knew she would be. She had the right instructor. Lottie hesitated. I've been thinking. Maybe I'll take on a few more students next semester. Vi tilted her head. Oh, more than a few? Lottie smiled. Let's just say I'm open to whatever the sky has left for me. Ethan arrived later that afternoon, a camera bag slung over his shoulder and a folder in his hand. I brought something, he said, setting the folder on the table in the office where Lottie was finishing reports. She opened it. Inside was a mock-up of a book proposal. The cover read, Passenger No More, How One Woman Took the Sky Back, by Charlotte Reyes with Ethan Landon. Lottie's fingers hovered over the pages. You want to write this? She asked. I already started. But it's your story, Lottie. You'd have the final word. She flipped through it slowly. Photos from the flight, interviews with passengers, notes she didn't even remember writing, saved from the backs of receipts and margins of old notebooks. I thought this part of my life was over, she murmured. Ethan leaned forward, voice gentle. Maybe it's not a part. Maybe it's the whole of it, finally coming together. She looked up at him, something loosening in her chest. I want to tell it, she said. Then let's do it together. That night, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Lottie sat on the porch, bare feet propped on the railing, a cup of coffee warming her hands. Alma had called earlier to say she was proud, that she was hanging Lottie's article from the FAA Quarterly on the fridge, right next to your nursing school graduation photo. Lottie had laughed, wiping away a tear before it fell. The wind stirred gently through the trees. Ethan stepped out behind her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. You know, he said, you're kind of impossible to categorize. She raised an eyebrow. Is that your way of calling me complicated? No, he said with a grin. It's my way of calling you extraordinary. They sat in silence for a long moment, the kind that held meaning in every breath. Finally she whispered, Do you remember what I said on that flight, when the alarms were blaring and I took the controls? He nodded. Every word. She looked out into the sky. I didn't know if I'd survive, but something in me knew I had to try. For them, for me, for the version of myself I thought I'd lost. Ethan took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. You didn't lose her, he said. You became her. Lottie closed her eyes, letting the truth of that settle. The sky above shimmered with stars, quiet and infinite. She had flown through storms and silence, carried grief in her bones, chosen love, even when it scared her. And now, for the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was soaring. Not because the sky had welcomed her back, but because she had remembered it had never stopped waiting. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Thanks for watching Camillia Story, where kindness meets real life. At Camillia Story, we believe every act of generosity deserves to be shared. So stay tuned and keep spreading hope with Camillia Story.